Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Satoru Umezawa. It is 1 blue-black for a 2/4 legendary creature human ninja. It has, whenever you activate an ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This ability triggers only once each turn. It also has, each creature card in your hand has ninjutsu for 2 blue-black. As the name of this video has given away, this is not going to be a ninja tribal deck. We're going to use that second ability to cheat massive creatures into play for reduced costs, and use those to win the game. Let's go over what the deck is trying to do before we get into the individual card sections. This deck will share a lot of aspects with a regular ninja deck. To start with, we'll need cheap evasive threats that we can get through unblocked. We'll then have our creatures that we're going to be ninjutsuing in. The main difference is that rather than being a Yuriko, we're going to be ninjutsuing in a Grave Titan. It's also very easy for us to run a nice Reanimator package in this deck for some really impactful turns. With a build like this, it's always a bit tricky working out how many of these big threats you want in the deck. You want to make sure you hit them, but you need things you can actually cast as well. We'll be mentioning these big mana cards throughout the video. From experience, I would say starting somewhere between 12 and 16 is a solid base, then adjust from there, up or down, depending on how your games go. The first section to go over is cheap evasive threats. You want to get these down early, get through combat unblocked, so then we can cheat in something huge. At a base, I'd recommend running at least 10 in the deck, but you can run more if they cross over with other sections. The best ones to start with all cost 1 mana and have unblockable. These come down nice and early, and guarantee we can swing through unblocked. Because they're so cheap, it means we can easily replay them after combat, ready to swing in again the next turn. To run a card in this section that doesn't have unblockable, or isn't 1 mana, then it has to do something else really good. Ornithopter is free, which is very nice and means you can replay it straight away after combat. Hope of Ghirapur has a really cool additional effect that can stall out a Spellslinger player at the table. Escape Artist is 2 mana, but for that you get a discard outlet, which can be very strong with some of our reanimation spells. Dimir Infiltrator, with its transmute ability, is a nice extra tutor. And then the hexproof on Invisible Stalker will all but guarantee it gets through unblocked and unkilled. Moving over to our card draw, there are a couple of different ways we can get those all-important 8 to 10 bits. First up is coastal piracy effects that allow us to draw cards when a creature deals combat damage to a player. With all the cheap threats that we're running, we know we'll be getting through damage consistently each time we attack. Turning that into card draw is fantastic, and I'm a big fan of these cards. Next up is cheap spells that draw us cards, all while putting things into the graveyard, either through looting or straight mill. These cards will be great, they're nice and cheap, and they'll let us draw through our deck, and then we can use the cards that we put into the graveyard to reanimate later, for some super impactful turns. Talking of impactful turns, we can also have some card draw on the creatures that we're cheating into play with Satoru. There's a couple of good effects, but mostly we're looking for them to be when the creature enters the battlefield, so we get the value straight away. The obvious exceptions are Consecrated Sphinx and Vilis, Broker of Blood, are just so impactful they're worth considering. Then there are effects which let us play cards from our opponent's decks. It's still card advantage, and in Commander, where people play powerful, high-impact spells, these will do a great job. When looking at the ramp for any deck, you generally have to think how it's going to support the cards it wants to play. The curve of this deck is going to be very weird, with lots of low-drop, colour-intensive creatures, and then a wedge of 8 drops. So that means we're going to start off with a selection of cheap mana rocks that produce coloured mana. These will mean we can play multiple of our cheap spells nice and early. Signets and Talismans will be great here, and you should be looking to run between 6 and 8 of them in the deck. The only 3-drop I like for this role is Dimir Keyrune, as the ability to make an unblockable creature that can be ninjutsu'd away is really strong. On top of those, I would also consider 2 to 4 large mana producers. Again, preferably they would tap for multiple pips of either blue or black, but this is where Sol Ring or a Thran Dynamo will shine, as it'll mean we can actually hardcast our chonky threats. Then I put Silver Fur Master in the ramp section, as the effect to reduce the ninjutsu cost of our spells will be really helpful. Why pay 4 mana for an Archon of Cruelty when you can pay 3? Moving over to our interaction, Dimir has never really had an issue with this, but to make it work with the deck we'll want a few particular effects. First up is obviously going to be creatures that either kill things when they come in, or in the case of a card like Steel Hellkite, when they deal combat damage. You can run a good mix of these, as there are cards that are good for targeted removal, like Meteor Golem, or there are cards that are good for board wipes, like Massacre Worm. After the creatures, we can then still run some efficient bits of removal on instants and sorceries, with special notes to Feed the Swarm for being able to answer enchantments, and then a card I'm putting in more and more decks, which is Flood of Tears. It's a board wipe that leaves us with the best creature we have in play or in our hand, which seems like a very good deal. Moving over to protection, we need a solid amount of it in this deck. Without Satoru around, we'll really struggle in the early to mid game to have the impact that we're really after. First up is creatures with evasion that can protect it. All 3 here allow us to protect our commander while letting us have a flying body to swing through. Being able to ninjutsu the backside of Malevolent Hermit so we can recast it on the front side seems like a really nice little interaction. Then obviously we have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, because obviously we have these 2 cards in a list that needs to protect its commander. The added haste as well will be nice when we start hardcasting our threats in the late game. Then we also have some solid, good old-fashioned counter magic. This will also cross over with your interaction section, but really save these to either stopping an opponent from winning the game or from killing Satoru. Okay, moving over to some reanimation spells, this will really allow us to take this deck to the next level. It also gives us a solid backup plan in case Satoru gets too expensive to recast from the command zone. First up, we do need to mention reanimation spells on creatures, as these are just great targets to ninjutsu in, all while bringing back another threat from the bin. After those, we have the more classic reanimation spells. These are great at most points in the game, but personally I would lean towards waiting until after the first board wipe of the game, shooting one of these off, and then having the best creature on the board. And then, when one creature isn't enough, cards like Living Death and Rise of the Dark Realms are great ways of giving us the best board state going. Super impactful cards that can definitely win us the game. Talking of winning the game, let's go over some more dedicated win cons that we can run in the deck. To an extent, the big creatures we've already gone over should do pretty well at doing that. However, you can run a few more just for the sole reason of winning the game. The best, but probably the least fun, is Blightsteel Colossus, as it straight removes an opponent from the game. For some still super strong, but less friend-losing effects, you have cards like Deadeye Navigator to double up some ETB triggers, Archfiend of Despair to spread around the damage you've dealt when you've ninjutsu'd it in, Original Jin-Gataxias for those who want all the cards for themselves, Tidespout Tyrant will be great with the cheap effects and the low-cost cantrips in the deck, and then Void Winnower effectively cuts your opponent's hands in half. Then with a deck like this, with a load of high impactful creatures, I love me a late game Rite of Replication to really create a dumb board state. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, there's a decent section that we can run. First up is lands that make our creatures unblockable. Having some extra redundancy is always a good idea, and the worst case scenario, they can make one of our big creatures unblockable so we can swing through for a win later in the game. Next up is cards that actually give us an unblockable threat. Having this on a land that we would play anyway is basically free, so again, something highly worth considering. And then last up, this is a deck that loves a command beacon, so that we know we can recast Satoru in the late game even if it's died a load of times. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.